joined on the couch for a new segment. We're going to be talking with some Scott Butterworth, Matt Espinelli. These are two of our big Deus Ex fans in the office. And Scott, you recently got the chance to try out Deus Ex Mankind Divided. This was our first time getting hands-on.
Yeah.
You had a big preview, but overall, what was your experience with it?
I guess my experience was basically, if you've played Human Revolution, you pretty much know what to expect out of Mankind Divided. It very much feels like they are expanding on and iterating on the ideas established in Human Revolution and just more refining them than reinventing them. The mechanics are going to feel very familiar to people who played that game, and of course anybody who's played any of the Deus Ex games, really. But there was new stuff to try out.
You had a lot of time to try. You were in this one level for 3 hours.
Yeah. Well, so yeah. If anybody read the feature that went up on the site last Thursday, that was a completely true headline. The way that a lot of these preview events work, I mean, they were nice enough to bring us up to IDOS Montreal to play in the studio, and generally in those types of situations, they have a very specific portion of the game that they are allowing us to play. This is the part that's not buggy, that's not going to crash, that they've sort of like polished a little bit so you can play it before the game is actually done. So generally those sections are relatively short. They're just to give you a taste and an idea of what the game's going to be like. And so typically because those sections are short, the amount of time you get to play them is, also short because they expect you to get through it relatively quickly. That was not the case in Montreal. Interestingly, they kind of just let me loose on this level. And we're like, yeah, like you've got like 3 or 4 hours. You can just kind of play around, do whatever you want. So I just kept playing through it over and over and tried different things every time. Obviously, one of the big hooks for people who may not be familiar with the games, you can kind of approach them in a variety of ways. I mean, the two major obvious ways to do it are, straight combat or straight stealth. It is completely possible to play through any Deus Ex game without killing anybody, with the exception of boss battles, which we will get to. But it's also possible to play through like it's a traditional first-person shooter and just shoot and kill everyone and blow things up and just kind of run for it.
But it's not quite like a Hitman style stealth, different paths to choose kind of game.
Correct. Yeah. So that was what was interesting about getting so much time to play the game. I really was able to explore all of the different options and all of the different potential approaches that you could take. One of the things I talk about in the feature that I think is really unique to the Deus Ex series is just how detailed and dense the level design is. It's designed in a way to support all of these different potential play styles. The sort of tortured metaphor that I use to explain this, not in the text, but when I was speaking with the developers, was each level is kind of like a piece of rope. And stick with me because this is a little tortured and I realize it's horrible. But so a piece of rope has a beginning and an end, right? Like there's a start, there's an end. It can rope in any number of directions, right? But a rope really is a variety of threads all spun together, wound together to create this cohesive single unit, right? So the level design in Deus Ex is very much the same thing. There's, you start at one part of the level, you need to get to another part of the level, but the number of paths you can take in between and the number of different approaches are incredibly extensive to the point that even after 3 hours, I was talking to other people who had played the same portion and learning things that I didn't discover in that amount of time, which is pretty crazy because it was not a very long mission. So the fact that I was playing it for 3 hours and still didn't see everything is like kind of just incredible. So that was my hands-on experience with the game.
So Matt, you didn't get to play Mankind Divided, but you have played a lot of the series as a whole. Going into it, do you have any concerns that you're really hoping that they address with the sequel?
Well, for one thing, one of my major concerns would have to be the enemy AI. That was a hugely kind of criticized factor of Human Revolution. So I was actually kind of curious for Scott.
Yeah.
From your experiences, how was that?
Yeah, we were actually talking about this a little earlier today in the office. And I would say that it's probably a little too early to make, a full ruling on exactly how good the AI is. I mean, that's something that generally gets tweaked right up until launch. It's something that can be improved or changed with relative ease. And that said, I had both good and bad experiences with the AI. Like, for example, there was one mission I was playing through, just entirely stealth, and had the tranquilizer sniper rifle and was hiding in a vent and shot a guard, and somebody sort of behind him noticed that he collapsed and crumpled to the ground, and so he came walking over to investigate, and as he stopped and stood over the lifeless body of his friend, I sniped him, and then he fell asleep and fell down, and somebody else noticed that this happened, and he wandered over, and eventually there were like 3 or 4 guys in a dog pile just like all asleep on top of each other.
Time-honored stealth game.
Which is like not how that would go in real life. But yeah, I think there's an interesting point to be made there that maybe that's not so much a product of poor AI as much as it's just like how stealth mechanics in games frequently work. I mean, you could do the exact same thing in most Metal Gear games or Splinter Cell games. I mean, that's just kind of a byproduct of stealth in games, the way it works mechanically. But that sort of stuck out to me as an interesting experience with the AI. But then on the flip side of that coin, I think the AI also demonstrated some there were some really intelligent moments. When I went in guns blazing, they would frequently either flank to get a better position on me, which is pretty standard, but also I thought was interesting, they would retreat if I was doing well. Like they would actually move further back in the level and find cover and get away from me if I had already killed other members of other teammates of theirs. So I thought that was actually pretty impressive that they reacted that well instead of just rushing at me and letting me shoot them one by one. And I will say that don't go in guns blazing in this game. You will die. You will run out of ammo and you will die. It's very much meant to be a cover-based game. And I think that really stems from the fact that it is a very cerebral and strategic experience. It's not meant to be, a just Duke Nukem style blow everything up experience. You really need to assess the battlefield, use the environment to your advantage, very tactically move among the various obstacles that you can use for cover. So that was, yeah. Again, the AI I think was pretty impressive, but I don't recommend running at them.
Matt, when you were playing these games, how did you typically approach the problems you would come up against?
Usually by stealth. Though I'd love to kind of make use of a hybrid between the two every once in a while, just to kind of play the cat and mouse game. That was always my preference. Scott, did you ever kind of utilize, because I know you did like a combat sort of approach and a stealth approach. You ever use a mix between them at all?
Interestingly, so I mean, the way that it would typically work in the game is you can choose your upgrades as you're playing, right? I mean, there's an extensive progression system. It is an RPG at its core. But because we were playing a game or a mission from the middle of the game, they just created some preset loadouts for us. And there was a stealth loadout, a combat loadout, but then also a balanced loadout that kind of gave you a little bit of both.
Right.
So yeah, if you want to play that way, you absolutely can. Actually, one way that one method I used basically relied on exploration more than anything. And I think that would actually serve as a nice balance between stealth and combat because you can kind of utilize either one depending on what you come up against as you explore the level. But I actually managed to make it pretty much to the end of the mission without encountering anybody, simply by skirting the edge of the level and finding a wall that I could bust through to get into the back of this theater I was trying to infiltrate. So again, the game does a pretty impressive job of allowing for any play style that you can come up with, including sort of a balance between stealth and combat.
Well, coming up on the end of the stage, did you get to go into a boss battle? Did you see how those mechanics are
Did not, although I was able to talk about that with the developers. Like I said, so the segment that I played was relatively short. It was clearly intended to, allow me to get my hands on the mechanics of the game, just the core gameplay. It was not indicative of the overall experience. I mean, I saw very little of the story, very little of the social aspect of the game, and also didn't play any boss battles. But I'm well aware that is the biggest single issue that people had with Human Revolution. So I talked about that extensively with the developers, as well as the endings. For people who didn't play the previous game, most people were not happy with the way that they handled sort of the choices at the end of the game in a sort of Mass Effect 3 kind of way. I'll try not to spoil anything. But suffice to say that the developers were well aware of everyone's concern, and in fact, they themselves even knew at the time they weren't completely satisfied with the way that those aspects of the game turned out. But even just from building them, they learned. Even before they got any reaction from the audience, they knew what didn't work about it and what they needed to change. And hopefully we will see those improvements come alive in Mankind Divided.
And we're also going to get to hear more about these things. I mean, you had a very extensive preview up on the site, but there's some more stuff that that's going to be coming out of that.
Yeah, so the preview that I put up last week was purely a hands-on focused, just talking about my experience playing the game. I'm also working on a feature that's going to be very interview-driven. It's going to be a lot of my discussion with the developers. I was able to sit down with 5 different members of the core creative team and discuss basically every aspect of the game's design. So it gets a little heady, but there's a lot of really interesting information about there. Stuff about, Adam Jensen's progression, the way this ties into the overarching mythos of Deus Ex. A lot of sort of deeper material that I think people will be very interested to read.
And Matt, I guess our last question is there anything that you want to know from Scott, or that you really hope that they change or that they fix about the game to just make this an overall better experience?
Well, it was more not so much a serious thing, though. I kind of wonder myself if there's going to be a new sort of replacement for the classic, but also kind of cringeworthy, I never asked for this.
Man, that seriously, like that line is the cake was a lie of Deus Ex. Just the most. So I don't know. Who knows? I mean, like I said, unfortunately, I got very little exposure to the story or to the dialogue. Didn't get to meet Elias Defexis, the voice actor. Maybe someday. I believe that there's a GameSpot interview with him somewhere from back in the day, but I didn't get to talk to him, unfortunately. So it's entirely possible there will be some new meme that emerges from this game, but as of yet, we have not seen it, so someday.
Well, one of the first places you'll be able to find that out is probably going to be here on GameSpot, and we'll be looking to you, Scott, Matt. Thanks so much for talking about the game, and I look forward to hearing more what you guys think about it as it comes along. So, Deus Ex: Mankind Divided is due out February 23rd, 2016, so we have a few more previews left before we see the final game. But thanks so much for watching.